The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our session 2 of the motivational interview training. I hope that many of you were on our call from last week, and I hope that many of you can continue on these as well. We've got another one next Thursday and the Thursday after that, ending on September 3rd. So we hope that you can have this entire series. If you aren't able to be live for the entire series, we know that that's kind of hard because you all work. But they are going to be on the Parents as Teachers, the Wyoming website. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to happen, but I am hoping within the next few weeks we're going to be able to have those live. So if you miss any of these, or if any of your coworkers would like to join in on this motivational interview training, they certainly can do that. And we will get that information to all of you who have signed up for these webinars. Before we start today, just realize that you should have some paperwork in front of you. If you have not printed off the paperwork yet, did they receive that just a couple of days ago? Okay, they should have received that. So you should have received the documents for today a couple of days ago in an email. You should have 3 in front of you. One of them is closed and open-ended questions assignment. The next one is affirmation scenarios. And reflections and recognizing change talk quiz. And maybe the most important one is the presentation participation guide that you should have in front of you. It does have all of the slides on there. This is probably where you're going to be taking your notes and writing down questions and all that kind of stuff. We are live for your questions. It really, really helps me for you to be able to ask questions as we go along. And we can open those up to the chat, and then I will try to answer those questions live as we're going through this morning. So welcome to everybody, and we will just go ahead and get started here. So this is me and my little pup Charlie, and I just kind of want to let you have a visual of who's giving your presentation today. I know that motivational interviewing is not, with doing it by webinar, is not maybe the best way to have a motivational interview training, but as we were just discussing here in the office, which we're coming to you live actually from Cheyenne, Wyoming today, this is the way our world works now. And so having a motivational interview training this way is certainly better than nothing. If you can get to a live motivational interview training, it is just really incredible, the learning that we have from each other in those classes. So if you have that in your area, I highly suggest that you do go to a live training. I hope that we can do that very soon. I am doing a motivational interview training live in Rock Springs, if anybody can get there. If you need any information on that, I can get that for you. I believe it is September 8th, Tuesday, September 8th. So I am a medical professional. That's what the MTASCP is for, medical technologist. I worked in laboratory medicine for over 30 years before I became a life coach, which is what the CPLC is, Certified Professional Life Coach. I've been doing motivational interview training since 2008 and absolutely love what I get to do. Charlie is not that small anymore, my puppy. She is a hair monster now, but we have a fun life in my home with my kids and my 2 grandkids, and I have found that motivational interviewing has made me a much more patient mom and grandma. It's made me a different kind of wife as well. So I just want to let you know that the skills that you're going to be learning today are not necessarily just, okay, let's use this at work and forget about it. These are life skills. As we came to that conclusion last week, and I just want to let you know, as we go forward, that being fully engaged, not only in this webinar, but also engaged in life, in every day, in our present, is really important as we move forward and become more patient people and better at the skills that I'm going to teach you today. So do be fully engaged, if at all possible. I do know that you are at work, and so there could be distractions, people coming in and things like that, but as much as possible, avoid those distractions by turning off your cell phone. I know how tantalizing it can be to check that email in your other browser or whatever. So if you can just close those off right now and be present, that would be great. Have all those printed materials in front of you, those ones that I just told you about. Those are the bullet points there. Have your pen and paper ready to take notes. I hope that there's going to be some things on this webinar that we're going to be talking about today that are different than you've ever heard before. And you really might want to take notes on those things and maybe even write down some quotes and things like that. Please feel free to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar, especially maybe about scenarios that you have in your own life and things that you would like for me to discuss. So on our training objectives for today, we're going to review the foundations of motivational interviewing. I'm assuming that not everybody that's on the call today might have been on the call last week. So I'm going to do the first maybe 10 minutes of a review of last week. And then we're going to go into what's called OARS training. And OARS is an acronym that stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarizing. Motivational interviewing isn't rocket science. These are all things that you probably already do in your conversations every day. But it is learning these skills and learning to use them in a more, I guess, a way that's really going to be, it's going to summarize your conversations. And it's really going to be more strategized, the way you have your conversations. I think that's the word that I was looking for there. And then, again, identify your own strengths and learning needs. And this is going to be something that you get to learn every single one of these motivational interview trainings is what is your own edge of learning that you need to push forward? What is your box of information that needs to get bigger? So these are some assignments that I left participants with last week. There was a pre and a post motivational interview quiz, and we're just going to continue to leave that open, and then in the fourth session we're going to address the post part of this motivational interviewing quiz. I may even do that next week, so I hope that you can join us for both of those as we go through the post piece of that quiz. Go through, and if you have not done that yet, maybe not right now, but look at the pre and post quiz and definitely have those pre-answers completed. Also, I want you to think of scenarios that challenge you in your work and what you do. So think of that family or that person in your life that you've really felt like a deer in the headlights, like you've just really been stumped by what they're going through. I would love for you to email me some of those scenarios to me personally at kathycordell@bresnan.net, along with any kind of questions or concerns that you have. If any of you would like any more one-on-one help, we could possibly even do a short phone call for that. So just let me know. I want to be able to help you as much as possible in between our sessions. And in fact, that's where your greatest learning is going to happen. Not today in this hour and a half, but it's going to happen as you go out this week and start to learn these skills and really start to have greater awareness of how you are in a conversation. And then another assignment from last week was awakening empathy. And I hope that you all got an opportunity to look through that awakening empathy exercise. It really is pretty eye-opening when we think about the ways in our conversations that we may form judgments against other people. And we don't even realize it. That's why it's so important to awaken it, because we need to realize how we may not be a trusting person in a conversation. So I suggest that if you have not done that awakening empathy exercise, that you do that. If anybody on the other end of this conversation has not did not get that information from last week, please let us know and we'll email you that as well. But hopefully everybody got those assignments from last week as well. So we're just going to go through a review of what we learned last week. And I did this in a little bit of a different format this week as well, so it's going to sound a little bit different, especially the same stages of change. So motivational interviewing is a client-centered, goal-oriented, guiding method of communication and counseling to elicit and strengthen motivation for change. And this is very important that it's client-centered because it's not about you. It's about what your family needs. It's about what the child needs. It's about what the parent might need, whoever you're talking to in your conversation. So it's important to take our agenda aside and let it be about the agenda of the family or the person that you're talking with. This is a very different type of scenario and a different type of conversation than what we're used to having, because we do have an agenda. We do want what's best for that family. Like as a medical professional, we do want that person to be well. But when we force our agenda or our thoughts, or I can just use this as a medical scenario, because we've all been in a doctor's office and had a prescription given to us. And if all we're doing is listening to a person enough to give them a prescription to fix themselves, then it doesn't work very well that way. You're not working in a medical model. And so you do need this to be client-centered. It does have to be about them, but it does have to be goal-oriented, which means that there is a goal in mind. There is a goal to be achieved. There's something that they're looking for, that they want to be different in their life, and you're helping them to bridge that gap by using a guiding method of communication. And guiding is not directive. It's not pointing a finger at someone and telling them what to do. None of us like to be told what to do. So that's why guiding them and letting them direct the conversation is so important. Well, how do we do that, Kathy? You know, this is something that we're not used to doing. These are the skills that we're going to start learning today to be able to strengthen motivation for change and let somebody, not to fix them or not to have them see their need for change, but to pull out what's already in them to motivate them to do that thing. So the primary goals of motivational interviewing are to minimize resistance. This is huge, because if you feel resistance in your conversations, you are not going to be the best helping professional you can be for them. And if there's resistance in your conversations, you are going to want to get out of that place as soon as possible, which doesn't help the intervention that you're going to have with the family. And if there's resistance in your conversations, there's a really good chance that you're not going to engage that family for a second time or a third time, which we all know is best when we get to go back and they trust us to be able to either come into their home or come to a meeting that you might be holding with other parents and really have a nice group discussion. So eliciting change talk is also another primary goal of motivational interviewing. How can we get people to tell us what we would normally tell them? We're going to work on eliciting change talk some today, but we're really going to expound on that next week and what that looks like. We want to explore and resolve ambivalence. And ambivalence is when somebody is sitting on a teeter-totter and they are weighing the decision between should I do this thing and shouldn't I do this thing. And ambivalence is not resistance. Ambivalence is good. I think that most of us, when we look at that word ambivalence, we're like, oh, I don't want to work with an ambivalent person. That's really tough. No, you don't want to work with a resistant person, but an ambivalent person, when they're weighing two sides of the conversation, should I do it or shouldn't I do it, wow, then you've got something to work with. You've got somebody who's already thought about making this change, and you can work with that. And then you want to amplify those discrepancies that they're feeling between that ambivalence. You want to amplify and create those discrepancies between their broader goals and values with where they're at right now and where they want to be. Changing perspective is huge. When you can get somebody to change perspective about a situation or where they're at in life, it's like this aha moment where they finally see, wow, I've never thought about it like that before. I know that you can think about somebody in your life who's maybe helped to change your perspective on who you are or why you're doing what you're doing, and therefore you had a different way to look at that thing and you were maybe able to change that behavior. That is a gift, a sacred gift that we can give to people. And another sacred and wonderful gift that we can give to someone is to be able to nurture hope and confidence in who they are and what they're doing. These are the primary goals of motivational interviewing. These are just the primary goals of having a wonderful conversation with someone. And so I had somebody tell me yesterday that they weren't sure that motivational interviewing was the model that they wanted to use in their work. And I told them motivational interviewing isn't a model. Motivational interviewing is a life skill. The model that you already have with parents, teachers, or public health nursing, or whoever you are listening on the other end of this phone, is a great model to be able to work in. And your goals and your values are very, very important. But motivational interviewing is a life skill that adds to the model that you're already working in. So I hope that you can be able to see it that way. I just want to do this little brief demonstration. Okay, so if there are two people in the room, which I'm assuming that most of you might be on the other end of this phone call just by yourself, but if there's two people in the room, I would like for one person to hold up your right hand and the other person to hold up your left hand. If you are in the room together, just put your hands together. Okay, do you want to do this with me? Sure. Okay, so you've got your left hand up. I'm going to put my right hand up. Okay, I am putting my right hand up right now. I'm going to press against you. Okay, okay, I pressed. Okay, now I want you to push back against me. Okay, so if you're in the room together alone, I want you to put your hands together. Press your right hand against your left hand. Now press your left hand against your right hand. Okay, what happened when we did that? Okay, oh, I'm sorry, she's not muted. I mean, she is muted.
Resistance at first.
Okay, resistance at first, and then what happened?
And I became conscious of the resistance, so I stopped resisting.
Interesting.
Okay, so
what happened when you pushed against me?
Resistance.
Resistance.
So I resisted.
Even though
I
have
done this exercise 100 other times and I still resisted. Okay, you could go ahead and mute yourself. Thank you. Okay, so when I gave that instruction to put your hands together and to push either against your partner or even to push against your own hand, I wonder how many of you on the other end of this webinar had that same tendency to resist against that pushing. We do. I never ever gave you the instructions to just let your other hand fly across the room when somebody resists against you. Even when you were pushing against your own hand, I wonder how many of you resisted against yourself. Isn't that funny? I never gave you the instructions to push back. It is a natural human tendency that when we are pushed against in a physical, an emotional, an intellectual, or a spiritual sense, that we will want to push back. So in your conversations, if somebody feels like you are pushing them or they are feeling resistance in that conversation, they're going to want to push back. And we talked about motivational interviewing. One of the primary goals is to minimize resistance. It's to minimize that pushback against that hand. Now, 85% of people in that exercise will push back. And about 15% of people will just not resist in that, or then we have the scenario that we have here where you can resist at the beginning and then you realize, ooh, I realized what I was doing, so I'll kind of back off on this. Those are all three scenarios that can happen with this. If you are one of those people who just didn't resist at all, there could be a reason for that, and that is called passive resistance. So when somebody pushes against you, you're just not going to fight at all. That in and of itself is resistance as well. So we have to realize that those are the three scenarios that are happening with the people that you work with. Either they're going to resist outwardly, they're going to have passive resistance and just say, okay, I'll do everything that you tell me to do. Okay, basically you can just know that they're saying, just get out of my house. I'll, I'll just do what you tell me to do. You know that you've been in that situation as well. But when you as a motivational interviewer can realize your resistance and start to back off, wow, you are starting to really make headway in who you are as a helping professional. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about how important it is to change perspective. I want you to look at these two pieces of information here and just read this slowly, this first piece. Now, did you read that as life is nowhere or life is now here. The way that we look at life is so important. The way that people read that sentence or that little statement is so important. And I thought that it was really incredible that I myself, when I first read that, I read it with an exclamation point on the end. That life is now here. But I don't know if 5 years ago, if I would have read it that way. Life is nowhere. And I was in a really, really tough place. And some of you may be in tough places. And the families that you work with might be in tough places. And they're reading life is nowhere. But when you can get them to see a different perspective, life is now here. We have the opportunity to be able to change and to be different and to be able to show our kids this as well. Wow, that is a huge perspective change. And you have, well, we talked about this sacred space with that patient, not patient, I'm sorry, with that family to be able to do that. Abraham Lincoln said this, hey, we can complain because rose bushes have thorns, or we can rejoice because thorn bushes have roses. Our perspective on life is very, very important. In my life coaching, I life coached to spiritual formation, and I had a woman who wanted to have more quiet time and more time for her spiritual development in her life. And I challenged her to read the Bible through the year, through the, there's Bibles that you can read like every day through the year. And she said, I can't do that. That starts in January, and I can't start that in September. I'm going to be like 8 months behind. And I said, no, you're going to be 4 months ahead. And it completely changed her perspective. And it gave her the opportunity to be able to start that challenge now instead of waiting for this black and white opportunity to start on January 1st. So we do have that opportunity to be able to switch a perspective for somebody so that they can start working on life now. We did talk about the stages of change last week, and I'm only going to keep this slide up here for just a few short minutes, or a few short seconds actually, because I have a new way of teaching you this. So a pre-contemplator is someone who hasn't thought about making the change at all. Someone who is a contemplator has thought about making the change, but they haven't quite gone into preparation yet. And then you've got the person who's actually preparing to do the thing. Then you've got that person who's in the action stages. They're actually making the changes. They're making headway in their life. And then they get into maintenance, which is where this is more of a lifestyle than not for them. They can either move into a stable and improved lifestyle, or at any point in this circle, they can go into relapse and go backwards in the change that they're trying to make. I put this information on what I call the motivational mountain. So if we are looking at this stages of change model as a mountain, you can see that I have all of the same things on here: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and relapse. And that stable and improved lifestyle is, hey, when you get up the mountain, you have to be able to get back down it. So it's very important to, I think that this actually is a really, really great illustration of helping someone through motivation. This pre-contemplator who's at the bottom of the mountain, and maybe you've just done this great perspective switch for them, and the aha just came on, and now they're a contemplator, which means that they have a thought about doing that thing. Now, if you look up the left side of that mountain, you'll see that I have 10%, 50%, and 90%. People who are 10% contemplators have far more reasons for staying in the behavior than trying to change it. If you have somebody who is a 50% contemplator, they're thinking about making that change. This is the person who's on that teeter-totter. They're really halfway between, you know what, I have some really good reasons for staying the same, but I also have some pretty good reasons to change. Now, I call this motivational interviewing training tipping the balance of change for a reason. Because when we can tip the balance of change where they have more reasons to change than reasons to stay the same, you are starting to get someone towards making a commitment to that change. We all know that we've sat down and actually had this battle, you know, to try to have somebody see their reasons to make a change in their lives or to become new and different. And maybe that's because that person's only a 10 or 20% contemplator and they haven't really thought about it before. And yet there's other families that you might sit before and they're ready to do those things. They're really committed to do it, and you can start with the preparation. You can start with brainstorming with them right away, and they're starting to move into action stages. That's because they've already been in the contemplation phase, maybe for quite a while. They've already created their own reasons for change, and they might be a 75 or an 80% contemplator by the time you get to them. And it's easier to have that family make a commitment and come down the other side of the mountain with them. So you also see the orange line that goes right through the mountain. This is our tendency as helping professionals, until you see what motivational interviewing is, this is our tendency as helping professionals, is to want somebody to tunnel right through the mountain and get right to that action. So if you have somebody who's a 25% contemplator, they still have more reasons for staying the same than changing, you go, well, this is how you could do it. And you start doing the brainstorming with them, and you tell them all the great programs that you have. If they're a tobacco user, maybe you tell them about the Wyoming Quit Tobacco program. You give them all the information that they need to be able to make the change. And that's awesome, because we need to do that. They need to have the information. But if their brain has not been around this cycle of change, if their brain has not been through these stages of contemplation to be able to get into the preparation stage, more likely than not, they are not going to take the information and the advice that you have to give them. So tunneling through the mountain to get to action is not the best way to get somebody to see the great programs that you have for them. Getting them up this side of the mountain so that they can make a commitment is the best way to help them get down the other side and be able to see the stable and improved lifestyle. Last week I told you about a family that I'm working with, 2 teenage girls, and I just had another session with the girls yesterday, and guess what? There was a relapse in their family. Somebody, copped an attitude again, and the family's fighting again, and the sisters hate each other, even though for 2 weeks we were doing really, really well. It's very important to know that relapse can happen anywhere on this side of the mountain, and relapse can happen anywhere here, and send them back down again. But the realization is, okay, start them climbing again, start them climbing again. Let them know that there's lessons that they have learned, and get them back up to these stages again where they're ready to make that commitment. By the time that I was done with that conversation yesterday, that teenage girl was ready to make that commitment to move forward and see the realization that she has so much power in her family to be able to create peace with her family. So I was able to let her see that again, and they are in these preparation and action stages again this week, and I will keep up with them on that. So remember this motivational mountain. This is really important to understand, and if I was sitting in front of you, I would ask you the question, so what's the biggest part of this motivational mountain? The biggest phase is the contemplation phase. And yet if we look what we normally do, maybe as helping professionals, it's the biggest part of the mountain that we miss because we want to just get them to do the action. Don't forget the other half. That's what motivational interviewing is getting them to the commitment phase. So motivational interviewing is more about who you are in a conversation than what you do in a conversation. We talked about being empathic and warm and friendly and collaborative and respectful. It was that awakening empathy exercise that we talked about, how we form judgments and how that stops us from having the spirit of motivational interviewing in our conversations. This is the foundation of motivational interviewing, and I can't teach you this. The only thing that we can do on this webinar or in a motivational interview training is raise awareness that if you're not this person, that this is who you want to become. And then we have the principles of motivational interviewing. Developing discrepancies, offering a freedom of choice, because as soon as you take away someone's freedom to do something, they are going to want to rebel against you. I was talking to this a few days ago with a friend, and she said, have you ever said no to a 2-year-old? And I said, not anymore. And she said, what do you mean? Of course you have to say no to a 2-year-old. Now, I'm not saying you never say no for safety reasons and all those kind of things. Obviously, there are times that we have to say no, but when everything is no for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or an 8-year-old, the thing that they're going to want to do is rebel back. So giving them the freedom of choice, giving them options of things to do is much better than saying no and completely taking away their freedom of choice to be able to do that. This is a very tough one for parents. This is not one that I did well as a parent when I was raising my kids. But now I see with my grandkids, of course grandparents always have more wisdom than parents, right? But I see this with my grandchildren now, and it's kind of fun, you know, to let them make their own choices, and we don't have those screaming fits, not as much anyway in our house as much as we used to. And then there's acceptance, not acceptance necessarily of the behavior, acceptance of the person who's exhibiting the behavior. And of course, self-efficacy. And I know that self-efficacy is a huge goal and value of the Parents as Teachers organization, to actually see a family fly on their own. That's what you want to see. And then rolling with resistance, because we said when there's resistance in a conversation, that's going to shut everybody down. Now today, this is what we're going to be talking about. Not only today, but for the rest of our time together. I don't want you to forget that this is the foundation, because as you can see, this is only the tip of the iceberg. If it's not based on everything underneath it, then it's not going to work really well. But it is my job to teach you the skills of motivational interviewing, so that is what we will go into today. This ORS, which is open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarizing. And then I'm going to teach you how to use rulers. And I think that you've probably all done this, on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being I don't want to do this at all, 10 I completely want to make this change. Where are you at? And I'm going to teach you how to effectively use those change rulers to increase the change talk in your conversations, because that is the next skill, is learning to elicit change talk. And there are 15 different ways that you can use to elicit change talk in your conversations. We're going to be doing that next week, and then some of that as well on September 3rd. So here we are with the basic skill set of motivational interviewing. Now, before I go into this any deeper, are there any questions on the other end of the line? And you can just type those in. Would it be possible to unmute someone if they want to ask a physical question? Okay. Okay. Okay, so they raise their hand by... Okay, so if you either can raise your hand, if you want to ask a question, we can unmute you, or if you want to just type in a question and say, hey, I have a question, that would work as well, and we could unmute you from there. And I'll just give us, 30 seconds or so in case anybody on the other end does have any questions, especially about the spirit of motivational interviewing or that the principles. I think I'm just going to go ahead and keep going. And if anybody does have a question, we can sure do that anytime during the webinar. So just let me know. As I said, your questions and your comments are really important as we go forward. So if anybody out there does have a question, I pretty much guarantee you that there's somebody else that also has that same question. So don't be afraid to answer it. So here's the basic skill set of motivational interviewing. Asking open-ended questions, giving really good affirmations, even when it seems like there's nothing to affirm, to find something in there that's good and that's positive. And then reflective listening, which is a huge skill set. It's the hardest part of motivational interviewing. And that is why we're going to spend a lot of time on that today. I gave you an assignment with reflective listening, and also our entire session next week is going to be about reflective listening and change talk. And then also summarizing. in your conversations. Okay, so open and closed-ended questions. I don't think it's any secret that we all know that open-ended questions are the best kind of questions to ask. Yet, I can also almost guarantee you that the vast majority of questions that we all ask are closed-ended questions, whether we realize it or not. If you have a form that you need to fill out prior to seeing a family, or I know in medicine, you know, you think about all those forms that we fill out, they're all yes or no questions because that's the best way, or you know, to gain information on a form. But when you are sitting in front of somebody, actually asking open-ended questions is a much greater way to open up that conversation. So a closed-ended question is going to give you a short answer. Did you do your homework today? Yep. Or if you ask for specific information, how many brothers and sisters do you have? 2. Yet, ways to open up those questions, and if you are asking closed-ended questions, you can always stop the conversation and say, hey, can I rephrase that? Because any closed-ended question can be very quickly turned into an open-ended question. So here are some open-ended ways that you could get that same information. What homework assignments did you have today? Instead of, did you do your homework today? And then, tell me about your family. You know, that's not even a question. That's simply a statement that's going to open up that conversation about more than just how many brothers and sisters did you have. So these are just 2 examples of how you can open up your questions. Being a good question asker and being a question asker who can maybe delve into those deeper places, and I'm not talking about you delving into those places, but you being curious enough to ask a question that might be in your heart but you might be afraid to ask, might be the greatest way that you open up your conversations. Yesterday, when I had that conversation with this young woman, she doesn't really like her mom. And so she is doing everything in her power to be able to basically divorce herself from who her mom is. So one of the things that I did to really open up the conversation, and what I did is I evoked some emotion from her. And as we were going through the conversation, I said, you know, I wonder if the reason that you are being so disrespectful of your mother in front of your friends is because you don't want to side with who your mom is. And then I simply said, how afraid are you of becoming your mom? Wow. That just stopped the conversation dead. Tears started to well up in her eyes. And she really started to realize, I'm embarrassed of who my mom is. And no, I don't want to become her. And if my friends think that if I'm defending my mom, then I'm going to be like her and maybe they won't like me. And it really, really opened up a trusting place in our conversation, and it let her voice her own concerns about her family. So those are the kind of questions that I'm talking about. Those are the kind of questions that really open up family conversations. Now, none of you, well, maybe some of you are counselors. I don't know. Maybe some of you are. But most of the people that do motivational interviewing are not counselors. So that's not really a counseling question. That's more just a getting to the heart of the matter and agreeing with this young girl about what you probably already know. Powerful questions. They're the ability to ask these questions that are going to reveal the information that's needed for the maximum benefit of the client. And I know client might not be the best word here. The maximum benefit of that child, the maximum benefit of that parent, that family, the maximum benefit of your husband or your wife. So the questions that you ask are not for your benefit. If you ask a yes or a no question, it's because you need the information, and it's because that's part of your agenda to get that information. It's not that you never ask a yes or no question, but the best questions to ask are for the maximum benefit of the person that you're talking to. And of course, those open-ended questions invite conversations. If you have somebody who is depressed, if you have somebody who doesn't want to be there, if you have somebody who is highly resistant, when you ask a closed-ended question, you are going to get a closed-ended short answer. They might shrug their shoulders. They might say, yes, maybe. Those are the kind of answers that you're going to get. But when you ask open-ended questions, they can't really get away with that short yes or no answer. Then you're going to have the person that you might ask closed-ended questions all day, and they open it up way more than you want them to. We all have been in front of that kind of person as well. So being able to actually be able to break into a conversation and break in respectfully into a person who's very, very talkative is also a wonderful conversation skill to be able to have. But asking those open-ended questions is really going to get you more information. This is very, very important. The language that you use and the type of questions that you ask, and even more importantly, the way that you ask the questions, are the most powerful resource that you have to elicit change in a person. So with the scenario that I just gave you about that young girl, if I simply would have said to her, so, you don't want to become your mom, right? That would have sounded very differently than how I said it. Maybe you're concerned that you're going to become your mom. So asking the questions or reflecting in a way that is calm and your demeanor is low and it's not going to incite any kind of resistance is very, very important. And then, of course, you want to use exploring questions and statements to gather more information about the person that you're talking to. Because when you ask open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, yes, those questions are for the maximum benefit of the person that you're talking to, but even more than that, you're going to be able to gather more information from them than you ever would by asking a closed-ended question. Now, again, this isn't rocket science. These are things, you already know this. You already know that asking these questions, open-ended questions, is better. However, I really, really want you to think about that this week as you're going into conversations with people, that you start to ask more open-ended questions than closed-ended questions. So if you have, and I hope you do, that you have printed out the closed-ended questions assignment in front of you, I just want to, I'm not going to go through all of these because I'm going to have you answer these in your own time after the webinar today, but I'm just going to pick a few of them out so that you can see that any closed-ended question can easily be turned into an open-ended question. So let's just look at question number 1. Do you care about your child's health? Or you could say, do you care about your child's health? You see the difference between those two statements. But when we look at this, closed-ended question or open-ended question, you don't have to answer that. You don't have to put that in chat. Is that closed or is that open? It's a closed question. No, I don't care about my child's health. Of course, or whatever they come up with. But just the way that this question is stated is very judgmental. And the way that we say it can make it even more judgmental, depending on the conversation. Any question, if you would look at the bottom where I put hint at the bottom of that, you want to avoid questions that start with did you, could you, should you, have you, are you, is it? Because the majority of those questions, well, they're all closed-ended questions, but they can also become very judgmental very quickly. And this is the vast majority of questions that we ask. I just had a question come in from Jennifer Warren, thank you. Can we change it to, how do you feel about your child's health? You are awesome. See, I told you guys you already knew this. Absolutely. Jennifer said, can we change it to, how do you feel about your child's health? You bet. That's what this whole exercise is about. So when you have a closed-ended question, when you ask a closed-ended question, on my life coaching calls, there are some times that I know I just asked a closed-ended question that isn't going to get me anywhere. Or I've asked a closed-ended question that might sound very judgmental. And I'll say, you know, I'm sorry, can I please rephrase that? And I'll open up that question and I get a much deeper and better answer from that person. So yes, Jennifer, thank you for that. So instead of do you care about your child's health, what are some of the ways you've been proactive with your child's health? Tell me about Sally's last doctor visit. Okay. What do you feel or what are some of the best foods that you're feeding your child right now? Okay, so those are ways that you can open this up and get much more information and not sound judgmental. Okay, let's try another one. Number 4, what stresses you out more than anything else? Closed or open? It's a great open-ended question. What stresses you out more than anything else? Maybe they've never been asked that question before. Maybe this is one of those great questions where you change them from pre-contemplation into contemplation, that they really, if someone, all they can say is, I'm so stressed out, well, maybe they've never identified why they're so stressed out. And tobacco use, one of the top reasons, the top reason for using tobacco is because it helps me with my stress. But if they've never really understood what their stress is, then it never gets narrowed down and identified so that they can learn how to overcome that thing. Great open-ended question. Let's look at number 9. It is important for you to exercise, isn't it? Closed or open? It's a very judgmental closed question. Simply by adding the isn't it on the end has made it very closed. And the way we ask the question. It's important for you to exercise, isn't it? But you can open that statement up by saying, how important is it for you to exercise? Tell me about your exercise patterns in just the last couple of months. You see that next statement, number 10, tell me more? Tell me more is really your get out of jail free card. That's what I call it. Now, you don't want to use tell me more 10 times in a conversation or you're going to sound like a clinical psychologist. That's not what we're looking for here. But tell me more about your family. Tell me more about your eating habits. Tell me more about what the doctor said last Tuesday. That just opens up the conversation and it lets them kind of go about their knowledge and what they learned. Instead of, did you go to the doctor? Those kind of things. Okay, so I want you to do this open-ended questions assignment on your own. And then whenever there's a closed-ended question, I want you to seek to open that question up with what you see here on the screen. These questions, what, where, when, how, and who are the best ways to ask an open-ended question. Some of those can turn into closed-ended questions like, how many brothers and sisters do you have? But these are the best ways to open up your conversations. Now, I didn't mention why. Why is also a question in here. Why questions can sound very judgmental. Why did you do that? Okay, not always, but a lot of times people see why questions as judgmental. So as much as you can, stay with the when, what, where, how, and who. Okay, that's all I'm going to say on open and closed-ended questions, and we might hit it just shortly again next week. But do this exercise, and if anybody has any questions about this, please let me know. You can send me questions ahead of time, or we can ask them next week in the chat as well. We're now going to go to affirmations. So we were talking about ORS here, O-A-R-S. The O in ORS is for the open-ended questions. The A is for affirmations. Affirmations are huge. When you can seek to find the positivity in someone's life, in their attitude, when you can seek to find anything that's good or right about where they're at and what they're doing, even in the midst of chaos and trouble, it is a huge perspective switch for that person. Also, when you affirm someone, it is pretty interesting to see how their body behavior acts differently. If someone is resistant, or if somebody is really feeling down, if they're really feeling guilty, if they're really feeling bad about themselves in that moment, and you can find an affirmation, and it's true and it's real, people are going to sniff out a false affirmation every single time, and it's going to break the trust in your conversation. But when it's genuine and when it's real, and it's because you see something different in them that they've never seen in themselves before, they're going to sit up and they're going to throw their shoulders back a little bit more. You're going to find more eye contact with that person. They might lean forward into the conversation and be more engaged. So affirmations are very, very huge. Affirmations can be very small things that you put in the middle of a conversation. It doesn't even have to be your words. An affirmation is simply a smile. An affirmation is a twinkle in your eye. An affirmation is a nod of your head in agreement with what they're saying. You want to comment positively. You want to find those things in their lives. Hey, if you have somebody who's had really, really tough stuff in their life, wow, you are such a strong person. You have really, really got some great survival skills. Or a statement of appreciation. When you find that somebody might be bearing their heart to you, and maybe for the first time they've ever told somebody these things, those are things that are to be applauded. Thank you so much for being honest with me. It's so important with that young woman that I was working with yesterday that I applauded her for her honesty. Maybe the first time in her life that she's ever really admitted some of those things about her feelings. And she had to be able to do that. Catch that person doing something right. Wow, I've tried to, 3 times to stop smoking, and this is just ridiculous. Wow, you're really trying. You've really tried to cut back. Good for you. One of the harshest things that we can do with like a tobacco user that I've seen in medicine is they're trying to cut back. I've cut back to a half a pack a day, and then they go into the doctor, and the doctor will just say, I thought I told you that you have to quit. That's not affirmation. That is simply beating them on the head again and telling them that they're not good enough. Affirm any step in the right direction. It's very important to do that. Compliment them. Wow, I really like the way you said that. Or an expression of hope and caring. I am so confident that you can do this. When we have, and again, it's not a false confidence. It has to be real and it has to be honest. That we understand the self-efficacy within this person, we bring that up to them. Now, affirmations, if you're like a cheerleader and you've got your pom-poms on, I mean, this can sound really false and it can sound really fake if it's not done with genuine respect for the person. So this is a low frequency and it has a high potency. Because we've all been around people that say, you can do it, you're awesome, just go ahead and be who you know you can be. And those kind of things, those affirmations aren't real. They're not really honest. So becoming really good at these affirmations is going to help somebody see something different in themselves than they've ever seen before. As I love myself, I allow others to love me too. And this is so vastly important for us to understand that self-love may be one of the hardest things that any of us on this planet can come to without a true knowledge of it not being egotistical or arrogant, but to truly accept ourselves for who we are, even in the midst of all of our faults and everything else, is so important for us to become able to love other people. So I'm not just talking about the people that you work with here. I'm talking about you and the people that you work with. So as you love yourself, as you are able to look in the mirror and honestly tell yourself, you know what, warts and all, I accept you today. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things that maybe tick people off. But having that grace to be able to forgive yourself is very, very important. Having that grace to be able to and there's a great word, give yourself grace. And to allow that same option for the people that you're working with is huge, to allow them to see a difference in themselves. So, affirming is huge. I put together an affirmation scenario. You may or may not ever come up against these circumstances in your lives. But this is exactly why I would love to hear some of the scenarios that you are up against, because it's important for me to be able to know really what you're dealing with. So these are what I'm talking about, like when you are sending me a scenario of a family, and again, absolutely no qualifiers on this. I don't want to know any demographics or names. You can change the names if you want to, please. But maybe to be able to use some of those on some of our next calls would be really, really helpful. So I'm just going to go through, let's go through the third affirmation scenario, if you have that in front of you right now. Jennifer is a 16-year-old high school student who just found out she's pregnant. She's not involved with the baby's father anymore, but she wants to go through the pregnancy and stay in school. She has a good support system at home, but her parents haven't been getting along, and she thinks that her pregnancy may cause more problems for them and that they'll get a divorce. She's coming to you because she's not sure if keeping the baby is the best thing to do. Jennifer has not told her parents about the pregnancy yet, and she's very afraid. This is a tough situation. I mean, a teenager coming to you with this information and trusting you with this. This is huge. What do you do with this? How do you affirm her? There's so much in her here. She's so afraid to go to her parents because of the reaction that they're going to have. But when you can have kind of a different reaction, it can encourage her to be able to talk to her parents and be able to do the right thing. There's tons of stuff in here. She wants to go through with the pregnancy. That is courage. That is huge. She wants to stay in school. Wow, this could be an excuse to be able to get out of school, but instead she's telling you, I want to be able to stay in school. I want to be able to do what's right. She has a good support system. That's a great way to affirm her. Maybe it's her counselors. Maybe it's some friends that she has that she's told you about. She's in a tough situation, and she is cognizant enough about herself that she doesn't want to cause her parents more trouble. That's a huge affirmation of the respect that she has for her family. She's coming to you. Wow, thank you so much for trusting me with this. That's a great affirmation. And acknowledge that she's afraid. Of course she's afraid. So all of those are really, really, really great ways. There's not just one way to affirm this. But when you can affirm and see those strengths, I also know that what each one of you on the other end of this line do, it's all strength-based. So you want to be able to pull out the strengths, even when it seems like there's, oh my gosh, how am I going to be able to pull anything out? This is where you need to be able to use that sixth sense to be more in the conversation than to do. So I want you this week to look through these affirmation scenarios. And I want you to be able to pull out and maybe read in between the lines of what you're reading and be able to pull out some strong affirmations for these scenarios. And then again, I would love to be able to hear from you about your own scenarios that you're working with. Listening is a magnetic and a strange thing. It's a creative force. The ones who listen to us are the ones we move towards. When we are listened to, it creates us and makes us unfold and expand, change, and grow. And when we are listened to, we can maybe for the first time hear ourselves. When is the last time that someone listened to you without you paying them? And sometimes even then, that person may not be listening truly. That they hear your heart. that they can just sit and listen, that you don't feel judgment from them, that they're not trying to fix you, that they're not trying to form their next great statement to make you feel better about yourself. But they're just listening. They're listening to your emotions. They're listening to your body language. They're seeing more in you than is in your words. When we can listen that way and then reflect back what we see, what we hear, what we acknowledge, we can let somebody hear themselves in a way that they've never heard themselves before. And this is a huge gift. Is there another question that came in? I have, okay, someone just brought in a scenario here. I worked with a family yesterday with 2 teenage girls who have been through a lot. I did this and I told them how strong they have been and applauded their efforts. Thank you for sending that scenario. That's awesome. Applauding their efforts. And can you just put Jen, can you put a short answer in there as to how they responded, please? Now, see, what Jennifer did there isn't something that I can teach you. It's someone that Jennifer is. So they've been through some really, really tough stuff. But she was able to applaud their efforts, which is very huge. She was listening into their situation, and she was helping them unfold, expand, and change and grow. And today, I wonder how much differently they're feeling about their situation than they did before she had that conversation with them. That's what's important to understand, is that it's not the time in our conversation that's going to change someone. It's the time in between. So a good motivational interviewing conversation, that person may not walk out the door and change when they put their you know, with the doorknob changes and you close the door. The doorknob turns, I'm sorry, and you close the door. That change is going to happen in between times because they're now a contemplator. That's what listening does. And I'm going to continue to go forward into now what reflective listening is, because it's vastly important for us to understand reflective listening to help somebody hear themselves. Jennifer put this, the 13-year-old actually was brought to tears, and the 16-year-old opened up and talked to me about some family issues that she had to deal with. She's a 4-point student, and she told me how she was determined to do good with her life because of what she has done. Wow. Wow. Those moments, think back in your own life. Those conversations, those times, those teachers, those counselors, those friends, those mentors in your own life who have been able to have those tough conversations with you, and they changed the course of your life. To think that we could be that for someone else is amazing. It's amazing. But we have to let them hear themselves in order to do that. And in order to do that, remember last week I talked about the gift of shut up? We just have to close our mouths and be able to listen and not want to fix them. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. I highly applaud you for that. There's your affirmation. I think you wrote more here. She thanked me and she told me that, once the 13-year-old brought herself together, she thanked me and she told me that she hadn't heard that in a long time. Both girls have been raised by grandma and have addicted parents. what we can do for a young, vulnerable mind that can go one direction or another in that moment. That's why parents as teachers exist. That's why public health nurses do what they do for moments just like that. So to be able to become that person, here we are now with this reflective listening. How do you get someone to hear themselves? Reflective listening is helping to build your guessing muscle. Now, this is a different way to be able to gain information from the person that you're talking to. The main way that we want to gain information is to ask a question. And when we ask a question and someone answers, and then we ask a question and then someone answers, and then we ask a closed-ended question and they say yes, when we continue the question and answer thing, that's actually a way to gain resistance in your conversations. It's called the question and answer trap. So reflective listening is a way to gain much more information from your client without asking questions that are going to cause resistance. So this is a way to decrease that resistance and increase change talk, which is where the person tells you what you would normally tell them. These reflective listening statements summarize what that person is saying, and you're simply guessing with your reflection. You could be completely wrong with the way that you reflect, or you could be spot on with the way that you reflect back to the person, but you're never wrong. Because however you reflect, that person is then going to tell you whether you're on track or not. I'm going to give you lots of examples of this. Like I said, reflective listening is the hardest part of motivational interviewing. And getting this down is really important in your everyday life skills. You can start these statements is so, or so what I'm hearing you say, and that can sound very clinical. When you're first getting started with reflective listening, you can use those kind of qualifiers before your statements. So what I'm hearing you say is, that's basically what you're going to say, but when you get better at reflective listening, you don't have to say this. So what I'm hearing you say is, you can just say, that was really tough for you. This was a hard situation. You don't want to do that again, okay? Those are reflections that are going to gain more information from you. And when you give a reflective statement to someone, what you want in response is that you evoke something, that you evoke a new thought, that you maybe evoke an emotion, that you evoke another answer, that you evoke something different from the person. So here, you're making a statement. You are not asking a question, so your voice inflection is going to go down. Okay? Irina says this, and thank you, Irina, for typing this in. I absolutely resonate with the question trap. But sometimes, even with open-ended questions, folks don't open up. What then? Excellent, excellent question. What if you have the opportunity for reflective listening? Great question. Because if all that they're doing is evoking silence, then evoking silence in return is a great way to be able to break through the conversation. And I know that sounds really silly. Well, Kathy, we will sit there for an hour and it will be silent. That simply will not happen. I think I told you when I started working with this 13-year-old girl a few weeks ago, the first conversation that I had with her, every statement that I would make, every affirmation that I gave her, everything that I did was met with a shrug of the shoulders, was met with, I don't know, was met with whatever. And you've all had that in your conversations. I actually had another scenario that was sent to me through email today that kind of the very same thing. What if they don't open up? You know, I have a mom who just sits there and she won't ever say anything. And sometimes it's okay to just be with them in that silence. that was about 6 seconds of silence that I just gave you. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? It's uncomfortable, maybe more uncomfortable for us than it is for the person that we're working with. But this is one of those strategies and tactics of motivational interviewing where when you think about when you have a conversation, we're talking about a guiding method here, not a directing method, not a way for us to tell the other person what to do. And when you are in a conversation, the person who speaks next is the person who guides the conversation. So if you can wait out a silence a little bit, it's okay. Maybe you're going to evoke something from them. Maybe you're going to evoke a word. Maybe you're going to see a silence. Or maybe you're simply going to say something like, "You don't really want me to be here, do you?" And in that moment, what you're doing is you're coming alongside of that person and you're letting them know that you get them. This is a tough place for you to be, isn't it? Simply coming alongside of them and see, this is reflection. You're listening to their silence. You're listening to their body technique. You're listening to their resistance. And simply putting it out on the table and saying, "Hey, this is what I'm feeling." You know, you probably don't want to jump up and say, "Hey, you're really resistant right now. How do we break through that?" However, simply letting them be where they're at is a way to give them freedom of choice, which is a basic skill of motivational interviewing. Now, you're all sitting on the other end of the line going, "This is crazy. I'm going to sit with my people for a half hour and nobody's going to say anything." That's not really what I'm saying. Because even if you do need to be the person that breaks the silence, you can say something like, "Tell me what you're feeling. I honestly want to hear it." And it gives them the permission to be able to tell you what's inside. That was a very great question. And this is harder to put into practice than it sounds on a webinar. Because I'll guarantee you that you are going to be uncomfortable after about 10 seconds. But breaking through that comfort level is so vastly important to break through resistance in your conversations. So reflective listening isn't just listening to words. It's listening to emotions. It's listening to feelings. It's listening to body language. It's listening to ambivalence. It's listening to the children scream in the background as you're trying to have a conversation with this mom. All those things. Your voice inflection is going to go down. Okay, so we're not asking questions here. Whenever you have a reflective statement, it could be made into a question, or your voice inflection could simply go down, and it can be made into a statement. This reflective listening, we're amplifying feeling and meaning here as well. So when you reflect back to someone, "This is a really tough place for you," or "I'm seeing some emotion. Tell me about that." Okay? Those are reflective places where actually it evokes that information. It evokes what's underneath the surface for that person. And you want to hear, you want to help the person that you're working with, you want to hear that client be able to hear their own change talk. So when you hear change talk in someone's voice, you reflect that back. I am saying this takes some hard work. This is the hardest part of motivational interviewing. We're going to work on this more. I'm going to give you some scenarios right now, and then I also have some homework for you as well. So what are you talking about, Kathy? All right, so here's an example of reflective listening. You hear this mom say, "My kids won't stop giving me crap about smoking." Okay, so you can kind of hear the attitude in the voice, and you can kind of hear, this isn't, my kids are really thinking I'm a jerk because I do this. I'm starting to feel guilty about it. Whatever you're hearing, or the anger, kind of like, "My kids won't stop giving me crap about smoking, and I hate when they do that." However this mom says that, gather in the feelings, gather in the attitude, gather in whatever it is along with what she's saying. There could be 20 different ways that you could reflect this back to her. These are just some of them. Your kids are concerned that you smoke, and that annoys you. So it feels as if your kids are always on your case. Smoking is affecting your relationships. You're frustrated by this. Now, did you hear my tone and my manner about how I said those things? When someone is angry, or when they're frustrated, or when they have a high resistance, you can see that, okay, you know, one of those sledgehammer and those bell things that you see at the carnival? Okay, you can see them at the top of that thing and they're ringing the bell. Okay, when there's that kind of resistance and a tone in the conversation, they are basically trying to get you to back off. They're basically trying to get you to, they're hardening their heart and they're not wanting to let you in. Okay, so when your tone and your manner and your style rises to meet theirs, and that's what usually happens in conversations, is that our tone rises to meet theirs. That's where resistance happens, and we're not going to get anywhere in our conversations. But if their tone is high, you lower yours. You keep it low. You keep it even-keeled. You keep whatever you're feeling kind of locked away inside and just have a calm demeanor. They have no chance but for their demeanor to calm down as well, because you are setting the tone for the conversation. You are guiding that conversation by your own style. And so it's important for you to bring your style to the conversation. Okay, so you have this mom. My kids won't stop giving me crap about my smoking. Let's do this in a different way now. Let's ask these as questions. So your kids are concerned that you smoke? And that annoys you? So it feels as if your kids are always on your case? Smoking is affecting your relationships? You're frustrated by this? I used exactly the same words, except I added a little bit of attitude on some of those. I put a question mark at the end of those. My voice inflection went up. And that now becomes a very different conversation. It becomes a very different answer for the person that you're speaking with. It becomes judgmental, and it increases the resistance in the conversation more than it drops it. Reflective listening is huge to breaking through your conversations. My kids won't stop giving me crap about my smoking. This is annoying you. Well, heck yeah, it's annoying me. I want to go out and I want to smoke. I mean, I like smoking. It's a way for me to get rid of my stress. So there's a lot of stress in your life. Well, heck yeah, there is. I mean, my kids are flunking school, and I got to go to work all the time and just put food on the table. I don't even know how to do this. Wow, there's a lot of things in your life that you're really, really doing right. And this one thing from your kids really makes you feel like you're wrong. None of those were questions. Those were all reflective statements where my voice inflection came down. When you are in a highly resistant conversation, reflect, 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 reflect. You might reflect 80% of that conversation, but it's going to help to lower the tone in your conversation so you can actually get somewhere. So here is a question or a statement that someone might say, I don't know what to do, but something has to change. Okay, number one, I want to go back to this. Where are we? Stages of change. I don't know what to do, but something has to change. What stage of change is this person in? It's vastly important that we know which stage of change that someone is in so that we can have the right conversation with them. Because we are not going to have a contemplative or a motivational conversation with someone who is already in the action phase. We're going to help them with the action phase, and we're going to brainstorm, and we're going to applaud them, we're going to affirm them. So when you hear someone say, I don't know what to do, but something has to change, the word but and the word should are indicators that someone is in a contemplative stage of change. So let's go back here. I don't know what to do, but is the fulcrum in that sentence. And if you were to see this as a teeter-totter, but is the middle of the teeter-totter. That's called a fulcrum in this sentence. I don't know what to do. Boom, that person is confused. But something has to change. Lots of different ways that we could reflect this. So you're confused about this. Wow, it sounds like you really want to move forward. You've tried some things in your life before and nothing has worked. Take the but out of their sentence. Here's a great way to reflect. When somebody gives you a sentence with a but, simply reflect it back to them with an and. You're not sure what to do, and you still know something needs to change in your life. That's a reflection. What you have just done by changing their but to an and is you have given them the permission to have both of these things exist in their life at the same time. I know I need to quit smoking, but it helps me with my stress. Wow, you really want to quit. And this is something that you see that's really helping you. Okay? Both of those things are true in their lives. Use and not but. Take away their but. Okay, remember that. Take away their but, take away their should, and reflect that back to them. That is called a double-sided reflection, where you are reflecting both sides of their ambivalence. You can reflect a single side of their ambivalence. I don't know what to do. You're confused about this. You would like some answers. Those are just simple reflections reflecting the first part of the sentence. You could reflect the next part of this sentence. This is change talk. They actually used the word change. This is where they're telling you what you want to tell them. Something has to change. So you could reflect this back. Wow, you're really ready to make a change in your life. This is something that there's something that you want to be different. You can see that in a few years, this isn't how you want things to be. Those are all different ways that you can reflect back to this. Okay? So we have already talked about several different ways. Simple reflections, double-sided reflections, reflecting the ambivalence, or reflecting the change. Here's another one. Everybody keeps telling me what to do. I wish they'd just leave me alone. You can see this kid with maybe a hoodie pulled over his head. You can see that he's in some kind of depression, a state of confusion, maybe as he's saying this. Those are all things that you could reflect. It's a really tough place for you. That means coming alongside. You're coming alongside with where he is in that moment. You could reflect. Everybody keeps telling me what to do. Well, it sounds like you have people that really love you in your life. Bringing out more than what this person says is very important. Now, I could be completely wrong in that statement if I say something like, it sounds like you have a lot of people that love you in my life. They don't love me. They just want to change me. They want me to be different. They just want me to conform to the things that they want me to do in their lives. They don't love me. That person could respond that way, and guess what? You have just gained a bunch more information from that person. This is a really hard situation for this person where they're feeling like they don't have anybody love them. You could reflect. I wish they would just leave me alone. Sounds like this is something you want to do on your own. Now see, if you answered any of these with a question, when you have somebody who's depressed and just doesn't want to be there, you could get some resistance back from that. I wish they'd just leave me alone. Wow, so you really think you can do this on your own, huh? Sounds very different than what I just said. Sounds like this is something you want to do on your own. Okay? So your tone and your style with how you reflect this is huge. This could be a double-sided reflection. Everybody keeps telling me what to do. I wish they'd just leave me alone. You've really got some people in your life who love you, and yet you're feeling like this is really just bugging the heck out of you right now. Okay, so you can reflect both of those sides. Again, you could be completely wrong, or you could be right on, and you are going to gain more information in that conversation. I know I should quit, but I've tried to quit 3 times before and nothing has worked. Wow, you haven't learned anything from any of those quit attempts. Well, no, I mean, I learned that I'm allergic to the patch, okay? So you're going to gain more information from that reflection. This is something that you really want to try to do. It sounds like this is something that might be the most important thing in your life right now. You see how you can reflect those instead of, what if I said this? I know I should quit, but I've tried to quit 3 times before and nothing has worked. And you simply said, what have you tried? Okay, so do you see how that's tunneling through the mountain? That's trying to get information for your sake, not for the sake of the person that you're working with. You're tunneling through the mountain, trying to get right to the action stage so that you can tell them maybe something else that they could try instead. Now, I'm not telling you that you never are going to get to give that advice and that information. You are. And it might take 3 or 4 minutes for you to get there. Bring them up, further up the other side of that commitment mountain before you jump to trying to fix this thing. That's very important. Don't jump to fixing too quickly. Now, I've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to go through these last slides here pretty quick, but don't worry. I am going to go through reflection and change talk much more next week. I want you to be aware that you do have a reflection and change talk quiz. I want you to print that out, and please do this. This is going to be vastly important for us to go forward in you learning motivational interviewing and especially reflections. I'm just going to go through this first one here. There's no way I can slow down. I know I'm too busy, and the kids are home alone sometimes, but I have to put food on the table somehow. What I want you to do is underline the change talk. That talk that represents movement forward in this person's speech, and I want you to underline that. And then I want you to reflect back that change talk. But even more than that, I want you to think of other ways that you might be able to reflect back to this person, what you're seeing in them, their reflections and their emotions. Okay? So there's no way I can slow down. I know I'm too busy and the kids are at home alone sometimes, but I have to put food on the table somehow. Oh, it sounds like you're trying to be a really good mom. Okay? So this busyness is really interfering with who you want to be as a mom. Now, that might cause more resistance, or it might simply continue the conversation to keep going on. If something that you say increases the resistance, acknowledge it. Don't just be uncomfortable in that moment. Apologize for it, or say something like, well, something that I said, it sounds like, you're a bit angrier now, or whatever. Acknowledge that it's there. We'll go through that acknowledgement a bit next week too. Change talk are these self-motivational statements that are made by the client that represents movement towards change. They are highly influenced by your counseling style, which means who you are in a conversation will influence how much they trust you and how much they're willing to share their heart with you. Change talk is a primary vehicle that you want to be able to reflect so that they can resolve their own ambivalence and change that behavior. Sustained talk is different than change talk. Sustained talk is what we normally hear. It favors the status quo, the resistance, the not changing. But change talk is that speech that you hear that is going to help that person gain awareness into changing their behaviors. And these are exhibited by, these are called the darn C's. I'll put this slide up again next week. These are the 6 different types of change talk that you want to listen for. A desire to change, an ability to change, a reason to change, a need to change, commitment to change, or steps that have already been taken. I promise I will go into this more next week. We will also talk about Jimmy Buffett next week, but then reflective listening and recognizing change talk. Please, please do this assignment that you have, this little quiz, because people are so much better persuaded by the reasons that they themselves have discovered than those which come to the mind of others. This open-eyed, wide look about where they've come from a pre-contemplator into contemplation, or they move up that contemplation scale to become have a commitment so that they can start to have a conversation, brainstorm with you about how they can change that action. That is huge. When you come up with it for them, it can cause resistance, but when they come up with it by themselves, wow, that is a great way to be able to motivate them to change. So our next session is on next Thursday, August 27th, from 9 to 10:30, same time frame. And we're going to review the learning so far. I'm going to hit that change talk and that reflective listening, I promise. We're going to talk about how to work with reflections, making simple reflections, complex reflections, forward-moving reflections. We're going to talk about 15 different ways to elicit change talk, so believe me, we still have some work to do. And then, as always, we want to identify your own strengths and your learning needs. I would ask that you would go out this week and that you would put into use the things that we have talked about today, and you're going to say, you know what, Kathy, I really stink at this when you try to put it into use. Awesome. You have now gained awareness that there's a learning edge for you. So please put these things into action. And if you would like to send me an email, I hope you jotted it down. It's my name, Kathy Cordell @bresnan.net. Please do so, and I will address those concerns and some of your scenarios next week. Thank you all for being on the line and for sticking with us, and I hope to hear from all of you next week. If there's anybody else that you think that would be awesome to jump into this conversation and learn motivational interviewing, please invite them as well. Thank you, and I'll talk to you all next week. It is .net.